Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We have a great panel today. We have Costa and Rob joining us from RBC, and they're going to share the stories about how their two um, organizations merged together. I'm a co-host with Fahad on this session, and Fahad is going to be working with me and asking some questions. We both work for RBC, and our mandate is to bring agility or new way of working to the RBC overall organization. Fahad, up to you.
Hello, everybody. So as Nizar mentioned, my name is Fahad Qureshi. This is my first session that I'm hosting through the Business Agility Toronto meetup, which both Nizar and I are part of. Nizar and I both actually work at RBC, where what we're trying to do is change the way the organization works and essentially ensure that we continue thriving as we have done so in the past, but do so in an ever more digital world. So we're really excited to host this webinar. It's really about the integration of two cultures. Culture is everything. Culture is very important. It's about like an organ transplant. It's about how these two organizations came together. Obviously, it's never going to be super smooth. It's never going to be flawless, but it's about making it work and doing what's best for our customers. We have two very, very critical players who are part of this journey. So over a year ago, RBC acquired a company, a startup, an energetic startup called WayPay. And two key players, critical players from those journey are Costa and Rob. So Costa is a leader at RBC within commercial banking. He heads up a journey called Manage My Cash Flow. He's forward thinking, and we have a great advantage of having a leader like him because he is able to understand business and IT. In addition, we have Robert. Robert comes from a background of finance and consulting, and he's a co-founder of WayPay. So to get started, Costa and Rob, if we can have you sort of introduce yourself, and if you could, Costa, if you could start with your journey on sort of how you ended up at RBC and how you ended up heading up this journey. And then we'll go over to Rob second.
Yeah, so I originally from Montreal. I studied computer science and then moved to Ottawa, where I worked in the insurance business for a few years in the IT department. And over time, I got an itch to start, moving more towards the business side. I felt I'd done enough in IT at that point. So did my MBA and went and worked in consulting for a few years, then got to RBC first in consulting, internal consulting, and then I got into this area of business banking. Product management was primary thing, where then I went and got onto this digital transformation journey. So that's how I ended up here.
Awesome. Rob.
Yeah, so I mean, go back to the beginning. I was a finance and accounting major in school, and I guess my dream, with a kind of a minor in entrepreneurship, I was always interested in kind of the entrepreneur side of things in business. But I exited school, went into actually trading as an institutional trader. Found that to be too stressful, so actually left that and started a business back then called bookkeeping.com. And with another business partner, did that for a while, and that actually led me into the banking world, based on the integrations and things that we were doing back then. And so my career actually from there kind of developed into on the banking side, specifically focused in kind of transactional and mid-size and large-size businesses. Kind of did that throughout my career, consulted with, all kinds of mid-size and large types of organizations, fast forward 20 whatever years. And Roberto, actually, one of our other co-founders, and Hutan. So Roberto's accountant. He was the CEO and original founder of WayPay. And he basically saw the kind of this need in the space for integration from an accounting and payments perspective. And there was also some need for cash flow, and had a lot of his small business customers struggling to get payments out and reconcile. So he kind of started this business to support that, and later brought Hutan and myself in. Hutan kind of came up the same way I did, but more on the technical side. And so, Hoot and I historically always saw kind of the pillars that, or the silos, if you want to call it, within the banking world. And we wanted to break those silos down. And effectively, that's what we tried to do with WayPay, is create a solution that integrated all of the bank products, well, not all, but a lot of the bank products from a business perspective into a seamless kind of solution that then integrated into accounting software. So our three backgrounds came together to, I guess, create this opportunity for businesses to create more efficiency, if you will, in their procure-to-pay process. And that's ultimately where the business came. That's my background and where the business came from.
Awesome. Well,
talk about that for much longer, but yeah, kind of the Cole's notes.
Thanks for that. That's great insight into sort of the journey that eventually got you to a point where RBC and you guys started talking. So Costa, tell me a little bit about sort of the cultural changes that were happening prior to, and when I say culture, I mean culture, work culture, that was happening prior to the acquisition. So I know my group was involved with business financial services in bringing agility, and again, Nizar and I are on one side, we're sort of trying to bring that change, but Costa, you're on the other side. You're receiving this change and having to adopt a different way of working. So could you share a little bit more about how things used to be and how things started evolving, and just around the time where the decision was made to integrate WayPay?
Yeah, so when I first got to the team, one of the things I noticed early was how product siloed we were, and we weren't customer focused, even though we said we were, and I don't think it was through not wanting to, but the way the bank and how things got sold and structured is very siloed, as you can imagine, right? So you had P&Ls kind of competing with each other, and so you have like 5 different payment products, and to an end client, a payment is a payment, but because you have this structure, you're going, well, we should sell, one group wants to sell this, one group wants to sell that. So you kind of had a bit of that happening. So early on, one of the things, my journey, and I started reaching out with, especially people on the cards side, commercial cards. And if anybody's worked at banks before, those are 2 different silos, usually reporting into completely different lines of business. But we always had a good relationship, and we always talked through what's the client experience we're trying to really generate, right? And how do we take these vertical silos and really talk about a horizontal end-to-end client journey experience that we want to deliver? So that was the start of it. Around the same time, there was a desire within business financial services to really start getting into business agility. And this is where your team started coming in and gave us a lot of training. And you started seeing the things merging together at the time. And then, by serendipity, I'd say, I get an email from someone in procurement asking me if I'd want to meet a company called WayPay, and I was like, yeah, why not? And lo and behold, as soon as they presented, it was almost as if they were right in my mind. Everything I had visualized in my head was coming to life right in front of me. And I realized quickly at that point that, we could spend a lot of time ourselves trying to build this out, but there's already somebody out there that's done it. And when you come from a background where resources can get tight pretty fast, you want to make sure we maximize the investment. So that was the start of that journey of how we kind of all got together there.
Awesome. And then from Rob, from your perspective, what was it that made you think that RBC might be beneficial to your clients as well, and merging forces?
It's a good question. Like Costa said, the actual initial conversation started out more as a partnership versus an acquisition. And, I think it was through that process that we got to really understand some of the vision and thought process around where, Costa and the teams were trying to take take things. Again, Hoot and I, having the backgrounds that we did and working at multiple banks, both in Canada and globally, you kind of get a sense or a feeling that the startup culture, the innovation that comes in a startup, and the speed at which you're innovating, and the way that you're approaching things may get slowed down, if you will, by something like a relationship or a partnership like that. So that's why originally when we were talking about partnership, it was more about helping to build or create something that they could leverage. But then as we started getting to the acquisition conversations and hearing more about where they were looking to take things, within the short term, but even longer term, what the vision was, we just saw a great alignment in terms of some of the things I was talking about, in terms of breaking down those silos and looking at the customer need versus the way that a business that the size of a bank might have approached things historically. It's about really what's the customer need, how do we meet that customer need, and how do we build solutions that focus on the customer versus the other way around, if that makes sense. So that we just aligned, and truth be told, I think the people we all kind of connected very well, and we saw a great opportunity to bring the two visions together. And honestly, there was a ton of synergies, just from you take a startup with kind of the technology that we had with a bank with the background and the reputation that RBC had, and then obviously the resources, and you bring those things together, and the skies were really the limits. And I think both sides saw that, and we were really excited to kind of be part of that.
So, thanks. Now, in terms of the actual journey of integrating, typically integrations are horror stories for banks, for large organizations. And Nizar, I know you were mentioning that in your history, you've seen this as one of the fastest integrations. So Costa, can you share a little bit about how you manage the actual integration on a day-to-day as well as from a strategic perspective? What did that look and feel like? And that's probably the first time where the culture started interacting. So share a little bit about what worked, what didn't work, and sort of what the journey felt like.
Yeah, so early on, as they're getting closer to the close date, you're starting to lay out what are our goals. Nizar was very helpful with me and teaching me about OKRs, right, and spending time with me to really write down what is that we're trying to accomplish. And first and foremost, we had, as much as possible, I mean, it's a bank, but it was a statement that we had, like, don't crush the butterfly, was the statement we had. Because you acquire something like this and you want to keep them the way they are. There's something that's special that they brought, and we want as much as possible to learn from that. There's synergies on both sides, right? We bring scale, they bring nimbleness. And so we wanted to preserve as much of that as possible. Not saying 100% was, but the intent was there. The second thing, once we got those OKRs, it was really then about culture was always at the forethought of our minds. I mean, when I read, I did a lot of studies on mergers and acquisitions when I was doing my MBA, and it's first and foremost, that's the thing that kills anything, is the merger of cultures. And so we spent a lot of time talking about, okay, how do we bring, and what are the metrics that we want to measure to know that we're being successful on that, right? Retention of these employees was critical to us, and we made that forefront in everything we did, especially the early days, right? A lot of communication, a lot of visits, making sure that, we were present at the Burlington location as much as possible, right? And getting to know everybody, and really trying to build that connection. I think the second thing we did, and Nizar again was very helpful with this, was having a business agility mindset. So how do we take agile practices and put it onto our roadmap, right? So old way. So it was funny because I was comparing it to what we got from corporate. and corporate had a very waterfall playbook. So we had a playbook for acquisitions, but it was overwhelming because it was really intended for a $4 billion acquisition. Right? And we're like, oh, I don't think this will work. So we quickly,
not quite that, right?
Yeah, no, it was
Yeah.
so we wanted to, how do we be more nimble and have very clear objectives in sprints, right? And we worked towards that. So there was a lot of effort, again, at the beginning to just clearly get this stuff. What are the most important stuff? Is it aligning to our goals? Let's just get it done. So, that, and, at the end of the day, it's also the team. Like, you really make sure that the people you recruit to be part of this journey are people that share and want the same goals. And I think, I was very lucky that I was able to recruit and hand select a lot of my team for that, because they are the type of people that I know that, role didn't matter, mandates didn't matter. It was about doing the right thing at the right time. And I could say that is a key part of it as well.
Something interesting you said. You said you did the integration work off WayPay in sprints. So how long before then were you comfortable with and I think I know the answer, but this is more for the audience. Like, when did you start becoming comfortable in working in smaller iterations versus like the traditional way?
Oh, I would say at the beginning was tough. I think because this was so new, like we were applying an agile methodology to something that wasn't an IT delivery at times, right? Because every time you're trained, it was always to, and maybe it was just the training I was in a lot, was very much as if we were building something, right? So it's like, in the textbook learnings, it's like, well, you do user stories and do that, and eventually, you're delivering. It was really changing the way we thought of what a business agility was, right? And it was really about taking the methodology and a framework and applying it to almost any context. So at the beginning, it's tough, right? You're kind of like, oh, really? Why wouldn't I just do it this way? And, you're kind of like, here's one delivery, here's the other, and you start going into your natural waterfall approach. But we stuck with it. And I think, it probably took a good, maybe 3-4 sprints that I said, okay, now I'm comfortable with this. And now I see where this is going and that. But yeah, no, it's tough. Right? It's not easy, but you gotta, as long as you're committed and you stick it out and you have good coaches and you got a good team, you overcome the change management as part of it.
And Rob, from your perspective, I guess you were also involved in these short iterations and you had short-term goals set. Like, was that what you expected when you were trying to merge within RBC, or was that, I was hoping that was a breath of fresh air, but maybe I'm.
Yeah. So, it was, I mean, you go kind of pre-acquisition and post-acquisition. And one of the things I'd say that went really well pre-acquisition, because there is a lot of work that goes on that requires, that kind of plays out even post-acquisition. It's almost like you're setting up the transition. And I think one of the things that we did a really good job on was, both sides, kind of keeping obviously point persons. I know on the RBC side, there was like hundreds of people, and you had a much smaller group on our side. And I think, managing that connection in order to not overwhelm resources, because there was a lot of, it was very frequent connections at times. And obviously if you had 100 people connecting with 4 people, it would have been overwhelming. So I think that was kind of key. But I think we set the stage very early on for moving quickly, being responsive on both sides, and that transition through as the acquisition occurred, so that when day one came, we kind of hit the road running to some extent. And then it was actually very refreshing to see how quickly we were able to continue iterating. Now, I'm not going to say it's the same. I mean, as a startup, we were deploying, product changes, marketing campaigns, sales initiatives, sometimes on a weekly basis. You can't expect to continue doing that once you create a transition. But to say we were more than pleasantly surprised on how quickly and how much Costa talked about like, don't crush the butterfly. We were able to stay relatively nimble given that we were being kind of brought into this large organization. The other really, I think, important thing that I find, and we talked about this in terms of the silos, like we as a solution touch on many avenues and many aspects of banking. And so I think what was a very good decision was not trying to stick us in under any kind of one silo, so to speak. And it allowed us to continue to be nimble and operate, in somewhat a similar fashion to what we were before, with obviously a bit more oversight. But yeah, no, I would say everyone on the team was pleasantly surprised. The other thing I think was really important, and Costa talked to this, and I should have mentioned this when I said one of the reasons we were interested and excited to work, or not work with, but excited about the acquisition, was the focus on the team and the focus on ensuring that we stayed whole and kept us as an organization whole. And that included all of the people, all the resources, because they made up a big part of what the solution was. So I think all of those things combined helped us to really transition quickly. It's not to say there weren't bumps, and I'm sure we can talk about some of those, but to say we were surprised would be an understatement. In all honesty, again, especially Hoot and I coming from the banking world, it's not at all what we expected in terms of the ability to stay somewhat nimble in such a large organization. And I mean, Costa and team, and our leadership and the focus from the executive side as well, and making sure that this was a success, certainly drove a lot of that.
I'm very impressed with that part of the story. I think I'm personally very passionate about this precisely because of this, because I do feel organizations can evolve and become nimble despite their size and history of success. So Costa, so it's like near day one, it's just after day one, and now the cultures of the two organizations really having to start work together is happening. Sort of, what were the initial sort of feelings, and in terms of when did the culture, what was the first clash that happened, and how did you guys deal with it?
Oh, the first clash happened pretty fast. And I wouldn't say it was with the working teams, to be honest. So you got to put things in perspective that this was the first time the bank was acquiring a fintech and putting it into a major line of business. So RBC has ventures, as I'm sure a lot of people know, and there had been acquisitions there, but they were very small and they rolled into different areas. So they were small and manageable. This was probably the first one where we're actually bringing it into the, our personal and commercial banking and as a core functionality. So there was no real playbook for us. And so as much as pre-acquisition, you try to do your due diligence, and that the organization's new to the cloud, to be transparent, right? So we just acquired a cloud company. Well, pretty quickly there was, oh God, security concerns, oh God. Right? So that was right away stuff. And then, it's really getting the rest of the organization. So being first is the challenge of getting the rest of the organization that hasn't traveled with it, because we are so large. Not everyone's traveled the same path of business agility, right? And you guys know, we're coming from RBC, not every functional unit is trained yet or has that mindset. So that's where a lot of it started early on, the clashes. So it was never with the working teams, it was with the rest of RBC. And I wouldn't call them clashes, it was more culture management. I know.
Opportunities to educate. Yeah.
It's educating a lot of people on what you're trying to do, what are you trying to accomplish, and changing culture in such a large organization is never that easy, right? So that's where I think a lot of the challenges came.
And in that sense, so now you're beginning to, I feel like I love this analogy of I don't know who came up with the "don't crush the butterfly." It's amazing, right? So now the butterfly is a little threatened. It's like, oh, I'm hitting this resistance. So walk me through, like, if you had 100 roadblocks or threats how far have you come along in terms of smoothing things out? I mean, there must be there like, what can you remove, what can't you remove, and how far are you along the journey, and what advice would you give sort of others?
Yeah, so I would say, so I'd say 75% cultural resistance, 25% hard resistance due to regulations, and the structure between a bank and a fintech, right? So the stuff that are in the 25%, obviously we're still working at. We're learning new things all the time about setups from a legal perspective, and that we're running into it still. So less worried about those, because those are there, but they're expected to be there. I think it's when we hit the 75% that's more cultural. I'd like to say, I think with some areas we've made a lot of progress. I think in some areas it's just hard because of the nature of where their perspective of stuff, right? So it's always tough to in areas of the bank that are their job is to protect the bank. Mm-hmm. So again, I always try to place myself in someone's shoes, right? And if my job is to be making sure OSFI doesn't come in and doesn't does an audit and does that, right? That's how I'm gonna always think. And they're doing their job, and that's the way I view it. They're doing their job. I think it's through dialogue. We've come a long way. So, but from the early days of it to now, still a lot of work to do. But I'd like to say that there, some areas really have come around. I think we see a lot of enthusiasm in areas where they see the value right away. So I love the enthusiasm with the Salesforce. I love the enthusiasm with some of the tech side that have, are seeing and understanding and getting and don't feel threatened by it. They actually see growth of this. So I'd like to say that it's come a long way. Still some hurdles, but I think after a year, a lot of progress has been made along those lines.
And Rob, from your sense, like, is a butterfly feeling pressure?
Yeah, I mean, I think Costa touched on it very well. And the reality is, as a butterfly in fintech, and especially with all of the different facets that we were touching, we were already feeling pressure even prior to acquisition. One of the things that we always held at the forefront, I think one of the things that made us attractive, actually, from an acquisition perspective, was that we focused on the regulatory compliance side of things. We made sure that we were doing things above board. It's not to say like fintechs don't for the most part, but I think when you're trying to, change things and aggressively change the way things are done, sometimes you flirt with kind of that line of, what's within or what's without, within or outside of compliance. So we were already kind of battling that, and working with regulatories, working with the networks, the associations, and all the other banks. So we were already feeling that pressure coming in. I would agree with what Costa says. A lot of what we run into is more an education. It's more about educating, the folks on, why we're doing things so differently, and why that still falls within, regulatory or compliant areas, because certainly it does. And certainly where we're putting pressure on, that's the 25%, right? Like, and we need to focus on that. We need to make sure that we're doing that. But a lot of it is, it's the cultural. And again, we talked about breaking down these silos, right? Anytime you do that and you start, it's not even starting. You think about, we came in and on day one, effectively, we brought all of these groups under one roof overnight, right? And started selling all of their products. So you take 5 different groups, assume, and they're all selling in their own kind of areas. And then you put that all under one roof overnight. It's obviously going to create some, I don't want to call it friction, but some pressure. And what I will say, as much as there's education, as much as there's some friction at times, there's a great willingness to learn, understand, and try and shift. And it's being supported at all levels of the organization. And that's one of the reasons why I think, yes, it's been over a year, and yes, we're still running into hurdles, and there's still issues, but there is a real willingness and will to make that change and to allow us to grow. So I wouldn't say the butterfly certainly wasn't crushed. It felt some pressure, but it's interesting how much of that was truly education and a cultural shift. But I think the two organizations, again, did a very good job of outlining exactly what those differences were. And then again, the only way you're going to get this type of change, the only way that you're going to be successful is if it's supported all the way to the top. And I very much believe that it is. The idea of being agile, being innovative, and of putting the customer first, that goes right up to the top. And we felt that throughout.
Awesome. Nazar, we can't hear you for some reason.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. So I know it's a great merger of two cultures. I think the biggest part is what has been learned, or what else the culture of RBC has learned from WayPay and WayPay learned from RBC. Can you, Rob, can you start explaining, share with us what did you learn from RBC as a new way of building the culture of supporting the bank and also supporting the customer and protecting the customer, and anything that you learned from RBC that you would like to share?
So I mean, there's been all kinds of learnings, right? As we've gone through this process, I think, and Costa talked about this earlier. The team that he built, and certainly the leadership, has been, crucial in kind of bringing us along this path and this journey. I mean, again, coming from the bank world, I mean, we understood a lot of these things, and it's probably less about learning from the bank, more about learning from the new mentality of the way the teams are kind of operating and trying to drive change within. So breaking down some of these barriers, some of these silos, the way that that's being approached, and some of the tactics, certainly that Costa's used, some of the leadership has used to create those synergies, I think has been very eye-opening and rewarding for us. Certainly, approach to managing reputation, ensuring that the customers put first. There's all kinds of things that we see on a regular basis that highlight that. The one thing I will say is the way that Costa will be able to talk to this better than I can, but the way that his organization is set up and the way that they've brought us in and managed kind of the integration, that was probably one of the best things that could have been done versus trying to bring us in and just put us, again, like I said, under one specific group. I think having a team specifically focused on ensuring success and driving change and a different behavior, I think that was probably something that you don't see in a lot of the other banks, or at least I haven't seen historically, and something that we certainly have found a lot of value in and learned a lot from.
Great. Costa, anything that you learned from WayPay that you can bring?
Yeah, definitely. The first thing that comes to mind is, you always hear it in a small business and you see it, but the wearing of multiple hats, right? And how nobody's really got clear roles, even though they have job titles, everybody's doing everything, right? And I think it's the coolest thing to see. Because you're not used to that in a big corporation, right? It's like, oh, well, if you need this, you see this person. And if you need this, you see this person. Where there, I could just walk to anybody and they'll help me. So it was good to see that. I think I also learned, in terms of, being very responsive to market and just going as fast as possible to take advantage of an opportunity. Was eye-opening as well, right? So the feedback, because you had ops, sales, and tech so close together, you see how quick an idea can emerge from a feedback from sales, having a conversation, validating with ops, is this something, and then tech picking up on it and thinking about delivering it, with product and that. And that is, it goes to show you when you put a good cross-functional set of capabilities together, the genesis of an idea can quickly turn to something that goes rapid to market. So I thought that was really eye-opening to see in action.
So that's a very interesting point, Costa. So I know from a business agility lens, we're always pushing to reduce time to market. And from your angle, so I know, Rob, you're mentioning that prior to the acquisition, things would get done on the frequency of weeks, right? Like in a week, you'd be doing a few things. Like within the time period of like 7 days, changes are happening. Mm-hmm. Bank, obviously, your order a couple of orders of magnitude slower in the good old days.
Yes.
Like quarterly. I remember initially back in the day, it was one change every 9 months was the sort of norm. I know in most of the banks. So Costa, so that's part of the culture. Like you want to get changes done. You're building this cross-functional team. You're getting insights. How is it right now? Like how quickly does an idea become a solution in the hands of a customer? Now you have
we're better than we are. So let me just say,
yeah, much better.
We were when I first started. It's one of the things we're really working hard on is tightening the cycle to delivery. Again, so it depends internally in that, but through WayPay, I would say that because the cloud architecture was new and the delivery process was new and the oversight that we had to put in, it slowed things down because we had to just meet a lot of rigor that had to be there for scale to allow us to get to scale. Right now, what we're really working on with the help of Hutan, who's the Chief Technical Officer, is how do we shrink the release cycles now? Now that we're at a pretty steady point, we've got the resources there. How do we get back to a cadence that they were more used to? Is really what we're working hard on.
Can I just pause on that for a second, Costa?
Yeah, sure.
For the audience's perspective. Here's a business leader talking about release cycles and continuous integration. I just want to throw that out there right now, which is typically a domain a business leader, as you know, Costa would never have touched before. So just please continue what you're saying. I just wanted to point that out.
Oh. Yeah, I guess that is cool. So, yeah, no, and I think what we're doing, and we're starting to bring some agile coaches in, is like we have a goal to get to daily deployments at some point, right? And I think that's our ambition. But to get there, there's a few things that have to be put in place, right? And I think, one is your DevOps practices are critical for success, and the automation to put that in. So we're working hard on that. And then there's the as a bank, just even when you go through that process, right? There's so many tests and checkpoints that we have to ensure, right? Like just the most basic penetration tests have to be done. So how do you fit that into a delivery cycle to make it time to market and make sure that what you deliver is safe and sound? That's been probably is our biggest challenge still. But we're pushing the envelope with a lot of that. Obviously, we'll never put our reputation and anything at risk, but we're the more automation and the more we break down components and be able to deliver faster is really something we're putting a lot of effort in.
Awesome. And before we open to questions, it's approaching 5:45. I'm loving this conversation. What would you, and starting with Rob first and then you, Costa, what would you do differently if you had to do it all over again?
Oh, that's a good question. I think on the onset, I mean, we talked a bit about, kind of the planning up to the transition. I think there would have probably been some things that we had focused on prior to acquisition to ensure that some of the things were crossed off the list. Now, the caveat to that is we could have also done it after acquisition and just focus it. I think there was just things that you just couldn't know. It's almost like you can't do them differently. It's like hindsight's 2020. And had we known some of the things that were going to become, obstacles, if you will, we might have approached things differently. So it's hard to say if I would have done anything differently. I mean, I think we did a lot of diligence, and I think just in any acquisition, any merger, any partnership, you're going to have things that come to light that you have to address. And so I think, we did a great job. The one thing I will say, and as you guys were talking to speed to market, and we were talking about like prior to the acquisition, kind of doing these weekly releases and everything else, you also have to be considerate of whether it's core functionality, feature, or function, right? And functional stuff feature stuff you can probably release pretty quickly. Functional stuff a little bit slower, and then core, it takes longer. As long as you're always mindful of that. I mean, what we were doing is probably releasing features pretty quickly. And we used to always say the customer is always wrong. And I know that sounds crazy, but ultimately a customer is going to tell you that they want something. And then you go and build it. And then when you give it to them, they realize it's not really what they wanted. And you need to make some adjustments and changes. And so what we started doing very quickly was releasing to a subset, getting feedback, and then releasing again, right? And I think by releasing a product in that way, you get customer feedback on a more regular basis, and you're really building to the customer desire versus what you were talking about, which is what banks and what I would have been used to is like a 9 to 12 month sales cycle. We have that conversation, you try and build everything, you release it to the customer, and then they tell you it's wrong, and then you got to wait another year, right, to develop what they want. So I think what we've done a really good job of is it's starting to bring those two worlds together. And yeah, so that's right. So back to your question, I mean, that's where I would say, like, the team at RBC from the get-go, that was very much the mentality. It wasn't like what we would have thought. And so that's why when we were talking about crushing the butterfly, or were we surprised? That's why we were so surprised, because they really did bring us in. We didn't get there on day one, but that's really what they're driving to, right? Is those types of iterations and that type of mentality. So it's been really great.
Yeah, on my side, I would say never underestimate the effort of bringing two cultures together. I think, if I had, again, to Rob's point, I don't think until you're in it, with hindsight, right? If I could wave a magic wand, I'd probably have gone and done a better communication to stakeholders in areas that I probably would have, had more hesitation with this than I would have eased the road a bit more for these guys. If I could, that would have been the one thing I would have gone and really spent a lot of time and explaining and walking through things. That's the only thing I would do. But hindsight.
But the caveat to that, and I will say this, right, is like what I realized is through the acquisition, even some of the conversations we had pre-acquisition and post-acquisition, sometimes you have to pull the trigger before some of those conversations are even going to happen, right? Some people don't come to the table until it's real, right? And so I guess what I would say is, and again, in hindsight, there was probably things we could have been lighter on pre-acquisition. There's probably things that we could have, if we had accelerated the acquisition, I mean, I'm biased, but by 6 months, right? We would have still had the same conversations post-acquisition, but that might have actually sped things up even more. But again, hindsight's 2020, and I think for what it's worth, it was very good.
Awesome. So we have about, I believe, 10 minutes left, Nizar. So I think we can ask questions to people on the chat. So on the Zoom chat, feel free to ask any questions. While we get the first question, quick question for both of you guys. How happy are your customers now that they have all these additional capabilities relative to before?
So I know from the feedback we've gotten to clients that we've gone to has been extremely positive. WayPay brought a lot of features that our clients had been asking for. And again, like I said, it was always on our minds, but this just accelerated. We estimated at least 2 years. This accelerated us, right? And that's where we felt saw a lot of good feedback was from clients seeing that, wow, these guys are going for it and trying to really differentiate ourselves.
Awesome. Well,
yeah, I mean, I would agree. I think what I'm actually really excited for is, and I mean, some of the synergies are starting to show now, but over the next several months, those synergies are going to become even more evident, and I think that's where you're really going to see an acceleration in kind of the customer fulfillment, the satisfaction. But we've had great feedback, and certainly as a partner, you couldn't ask for a better bank and brand.
Awesome. Gil asked a question: in the spirit of organizational learning, how has this experience informed RBC's handling of other acquisitions? Maybe Costa, you can talk at least from a PNCB's or BFS perspective.
Oh, lots. I can tell you, I still stay in touch with the folks in corporate strategy that do a lot of the mergers and acquisition, and there was a lot of good learnings from this, right? Like I said, there's the experience before was either the big acquisitions like City National, a big one, or very, very small ones. So we were that first one that was right in the middle. So there was a lot of good information sharing and lessons learned with a retrospective and stuff that I think they've been able to apply since.
The working in short iterations to manage the work versus playbook.
Yeah.
Are they heeding that advice, or is that still tough?
Well, you know what? I that's a great question. I have to follow up with them on that. I do know that a lot we fed into their playbook some ideas, but I don't know how far, if they're practicing business agility themselves, right? So you know better. You're the enterprise.
That's right. I want to disclose everything on a public chat, but yeah. Awesome. And Gil also asked another question, and a question for Robert. How did you prepare your own staff throughout the journey? I imagine some people were feeling nervous having joined a startup and then learning that they're now working for a bank, which is a lot. Used to be the largest, highest market cap in Canada, but now I think Shopify. But yeah, for going startup to biggest company in Canada almost.
So in all honesty, it was somewhat of a secret for quite a period of time, right? There was only a select few of us that kind of knew what was going on. And then once the decision had been made, it was, I can't remember exactly. It wouldn't have been more than a month or two where we started kind of having the conversation. So what I would say is, in terms of bringing, first of all, I'd say the team was ecstatic. But I think one of the best things that we did was when we made the announcement. You had Costa and senior leadership coming in and kind of making that announcement jointly. And we had a big a party almost. We had cake and all kinds of other things. And then then immediately after that, we had conversations with each of the individuals. And as we said, ensuring that the staff were feeling confident, secure, that their roles were going to continue and that they were valued. And then helping them to understand how they were going to fit into the organization. So we actually did a lot of work, and we had a lot of meetings prior to that announcement to make sure that that went really smoothly. Again, because keeping the resources, I hate calling them resources, or people, like the team, right? They were making sure that they were feeling comfortable and confident in what their role would be in the future, in the new world, was kind of priority number one, in all honesty. We put that, as much as it was just as important as ensuring that the technology integrated properly and everything else. It was making sure that the folks on the team were well informed in terms of what their role would be, where they were going to be situated, who they were going to be reporting to. And we did as little change as possible for the first year. to any of that. So we almost kept everything kind of, again, don't crush the butterfly, kept everything somewhat consistent. And then, obviously introducing changes, kind of micro changes as time went on. But I think that was probably one of the best things that we did.
Awesome. And just to add to that, that was when we wrote our OKRs, that was like first and foremost, everybody on the team was committed to making sure everybody felt welcomed. And I have to say, if there was one area that of my experience with the acquisition, the folks on the RBC side from our HR team were so good at coaching us and being very thoughtful, and that it was really eye-opening, and greatly appreciated what they did.
So I just want to, now this is not so much a question, but it'll be a little preachy, but looking from a business agility lens, right? Like short cycles, check. Getting feedback to inform what you do next, check. Thinking about DevOps and continuous deployment, check. Having a cross-functional teams and getting feedback from the various components, check. So you seem to be checking a lot of those things that, we sort of talk about from the business agility lens. So what's next? Where does this journey go next? What's the next battle? I mean, you talked about, closing some of the 25% and solving that, but like operationally, like based on how you work, what's the next mountain you want to climb?
So for me, the next thing is getting even more scale and being, so if I would say success for me in the next year is we're 3 times faster at deployment than we are today. We exponentially grow the client base to probably double to triple its size. And we grow the knowledge within an RBC. Like, this becomes the platform that all our sales force really focuses on. If we could hit those 3 things by the end of the year, I think then we're in an amazing spot.
And from your perspective, Rob, what's the thing?
Yeah, I mean, I would honestly just echo what Costa said. I think it comes down to scaling. And when I say scale, I mean, like, obviously more throughput, but also some of the things that we've talked about in terms of accelerating things to market, reducing some of the friction through education, continuing to, implement and leverage, I guess, the tools that we've put in place to deploy, right? So it's more about scaling. It's more about, we've gotten to a point, it's like speed things up and grow the portfolio. That's honestly just, it's continuing to work on what we've already started implementing and leveraging some of the things that you've been talking to
awesome.
More aggressively. Yeah.
So Gail also mentioned something interesting. Gail's actually a very skilled Agile coach. He's actually also written books on Agile, especially for non-IT teams. What's fascinating about this meetup is nobody ever used the word Scrum or SAFe, which is a scaled Agile framework. So I just want to say that this is probably in history of Agile that nobody mentioned Scrum in a call, but that's the beauty of business agility is we are principle-based. Any final thoughts before we close? And Nizar, anything from yourselves? And I just want to point out for everybody's benefit, Nizar was instrumental in working with Costa. My group was sort of far away in the corner. We weren't really involved in the day-to-day. We were involved early on, but not so much in the WayPay part. And Nizar, and come closer to the microphone, Nizar. We can't hear you.
I was so close to it was not worth asking. It's good that Fahad is also pretty good. But there's only 1 minute left. So thank you so much for your own time. Great questions, and thank you for Rob and Costa who spent like 1 hour with us. And I think it would be a great journey to work with you guys.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Costa and Rob. Any final thoughts in the last 30 seconds or so?
No, this was a great experience, and I wouldn't trade this experience for the world that we went through. It's one that you will always carry the rest of your life.
Yeah, I echo that. I mean, appreciate having the opportunity to speak with you guys, but yeah, and actually this was fun talking through that experience again. I would agree. It's something that you will remember forever, right? And it does. It helps to create a foundation for everything else you do going forward. So it's been great.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Thanks.
Right.